She walked in carrying a gift wrapped in gold ribbon and walked out wearing nothing but a broken heart. 1 second. That's all it took to destroy 5 years of marriage. She didn't scream. She didn't throw things. She just slid her wedding ring onto his desk, the same desk where he'd signed deals that made grown men tremble, and disappeared into the dark. What she didn't tell him, she was carrying his child. If you've ever loved someone who shattered you completely, stay until the very end. Like this video, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The anniversary gift had taken Vivian Hale 3 months to find. It wasn't expensive in the way that things in Dante Moretti's world were expensive. No diamonds, no bespoke watches, no rare bottles of wine from cellars in Tuscany that cost more than most people's mortgages. It was a leather-bound journal, hand-stitched, with a compass embossed on the cover. Inside the front page, she had written, in her careful looping script, "You always knew how to find your way. Thank you for finding me." She'd wrapped it herself. Gold ribbon, which she'd tied and retied 4 times because her hands kept shaking. Not from nerves, exactly. More from the strange, complicated feeling of loving someone you still couldn't fully explain. 5 years. 5 years since Dante Moretti had looked at her across a crowded charity gala and said, with complete sincerity and zero apology, "You're the only person in this room who looks like they'd rather be somewhere else. I respect that." And somehow, impossibly, that had been the beginning. She'd known what he was. You couldn't date Dante Moretti without knowing. His name came attached to whispers, to half-finished sentences, to men who straightened their backs when he entered a room. The Moretti family had operated in the shadowed architecture of New York for 3 generations. Construction, unions, shipping, and the places where all 3 overlapped into something that no district attorney had ever successfully prosecuted. Dante hadn't inherited the empire so much as he had absorbed it, the way a stone absorbs heat, slowly and completely and without drama. What she hadn't expected was the coffee. Every single morning, without exception, he made it himself. Not an assistant, not the housekeeper who came Tuesdays and Thursdays. Him. Dark roast, 2 sugars, the cup left on the counter beside her laptop, with a precision that suggested military discipline. He never mentioned it. She never thanked him. It had become its own silent language between them. That was the Dante Hale, Dante Moretti, she'd built her life around. The man who remembered she hated carnations but loved sunflowers, even in October when they were expensive and slightly out of season. The man who slept on the left side of the bed because she'd once mentioned in passing that she felt safer near the window. The man who had promised her, on the roof of the penthouse on their first anniversary, with the whole filthy, gorgeous sprawl of Manhattan laid out below them like something God hadn't finished painting. "No woman will ever come before you. Not ever. I swear it." She had believed him. She had believed him all the way up to the moment she stood outside his private office on the 34th floor, anniversary gift under her arm, and heard the particular quiet of a room containing 2 people who thought they were alone. The door wasn't fully closed. It never was when Dante was working. He hated sealed rooms, hated the feeling of being cut off. One of the few vulnerabilities she knew about him, a leftover from something in his childhood he'd never fully explained. The gap was maybe 4 inches. Enough. Enough for her to see Bianca Rossi's hands on his chest. Enough to see Dante's hands resting at Bianca's waist. Enough to see the kiss. Vivian stood there for what felt like a full geological era. In reality, it was probably 6 seconds. Her brain did what brains do when they receive information that contradicts everything they believe to be structurally true. It stalled. It buffered. It tried to run the image through filters, searching for an alternate explanation, finding none. Bianca Rossi had been Dante's executive assistant for 2 years. She was 32, Milanese, with the kind of bone structure that made painters jealous and the kind of professional efficiency that made assistants everywhere look inadequate. Vivian had never disliked her, specifically. She had simply filed her under Dante's world, the category that contained all the people, places, and obligations that existed in the life he lived from 9 to midnight, the life she was adjacent to but never fully inside. The gift slipped from Vivian's hands. The sound it made when it hit the marble floor was not dramatic. It wasn't a crash. It was a dense, flat thud. The sound of something solid hitting something harder, a sound entirely out of proportion to the devastation it carried. But it was enough. Dante turned. Their eyes met through the 4-inch gap. His face did something complicated: recognition, then alarm, then something that might have been the beginning of an explanation. His mouth opened. Vivian didn't let him. She pushed open the door, slowly, not violently, her body operating on a calm that felt borrowed from somewhere she didn't recognize. And she crossed the room to his desk. Bianca had stepped back. The woman had the decency, or maybe just the survival instinct, to press herself against the far wall and say nothing. Vivian looked at Dante for a long moment. She pulled the wedding ring off her left hand. Her finger was slightly red underneath, the way fingers get when you've been wearing something for so long it becomes part of your skin. The ring was simple. Dante had offered her something larger, more theatrical, and she had chosen this one herself. A plain gold band with a single small diamond, nothing that shouted, something that lasted. She set it on his desk. She turned around and walked to the elevator. The elevator opened immediately, which felt like some small mercy from a universe that wasn't offering many. She stepped inside. She pressed the lobby button. The doors closed on Dante's voice saying her name, Vivian. And then there was nothing but the hum of the cable and the city lights rising up through the glass as the car descended, and the particular sensation of a person whose entire internal architecture has just collapsed, but whose legs are still somehow, stubbornly, working. She didn't cry in the elevator. She didn't cry in the lobby, or on the sidewalk, or in the cab she flagged down on 57th Street. She gave the driver an address, not the penthouse, not anywhere connected to Dante's world, and sat in the back with her hands pressed flat against her thighs and her eyes fixed on nothing. The tears came somewhere around the Midtown Tunnel, quietly, without announcement, the way serious grief tends to arrive. Not a sob, just a slow, wrecking dissolution, the kind that starts behind your eyes and moves downward through your chest like something breaking loose from where it had been bolted. She was 29 years old. She was 8 weeks pregnant. She had not yet told Dante. That last fact was the one that kept surfacing, the one her mind circled back to even as it was trying to process everything else. She had found out 12 days ago. She'd been planning to tell him tonight, in fact, after dinner, after the gift, with the city spread out below them the way it had been on that first anniversary. She'd imagined the look on his face. She'd been looking forward to it in the way you look forward to something rare and irreversible. She spent that night in a hotel on the west side. She paid cash. She didn't sleep. She lay on the hotel bed in her anniversary dress and stared at the ceiling and tried to think in straight lines. But grief doesn't permit that. Grief is not linear. It doubles back. It spirals. It keeps returning you to the same few images. His hands at Bianca's waist, the lipstick mark on his collar, the sound of the gift hitting the marble. And each time you arrive at the same images, they are somehow worse than before, like a cut that reopens. By 3 a.m, she had made her decision. It wasn't an emotional decision. That was the thing that surprised her later, when she had distance enough to examine it. It was cold, methodical. The decision of a woman who had grown up watching her mother stay too long in the wrong places for the wrong reasons, and had promised herself, very young, that she would not repeat the pattern. She left the hotel at 5 a.m. She took 3 cabs to make the route harder to trace, an instinct she hadn't known she possessed until that night, and that she recognized with a grim private acknowledgement she must have absorbed from 5 years of living inside Dante Moretti's world. She stopped at 2 different ATMs and withdrew the maximum both times. She bought a prepaid phone from a 24-hour drugstore on 9th Avenue. She went to her sister's apartment in Brooklyn, where she stayed for exactly 2 days, long enough to pack what she could carry, to borrow enough cash to cover what she hadn't been able to withdraw, and to refuse every question her sister asked. Clara was 4 years older and sharp in the way that people who have survived difficult families tend to be sharp. And she looked at Vivian's face and understood, without being told the specifics, that whatever had happened was not recoverable. "Where are you going?" Clara asked, standing in her doorway at 6 a.m, with coffee she'd made because it was the only useful thing available. "Away." "That's not an answer." "I know." Clara had looked at her for a long moment. "Are you safe?" "From him? Yes." A pause. "He wouldn't hurt me." And even now, even standing in the wreckage of everything, she believed that. Whatever Dante Moretti was, physical violence toward her had never been part of the equation. "It's not about safety." "Then what's it about?" Vivian picked up her bag. Survival. She left before Clara could formulate a follow-up. She wrote the letter on the train out of Pennsylvania Station. A single page, handwritten on hotel stationery she'd taken without quite knowing why. She kept it simple. She kept it true. You chose another woman. I choose our child. She mailed it from a post office in Newark, which she passed through without stopping, continuing west on a route she constructed as she went. Cash, buses, no pattern, no name. The name Vivian Moretti ceased to exist somewhere in Ohio. By the time she reached Oregon, 11 days later, she was Vivian Hale again, or close enough. Portland received her without interest, which was exactly what she needed. It was the kind of city that had seen enough people arriving with complicated histories that it had learned not to ask. She found a room in a house with two other women, both of whom minded their own business with an expertise she deeply appreciated. She found work, administrative, unglamorous, steady, at a small nonprofit that ran job training programs for women transitioning out of domestic situations. The irony was not lost on her. She sat with it anyway. She did not think about Dante. That was the rule she enforced with a ferocity that surprised even her. She constructed a wall around his section of her memory, and she maintained it with the same cold precision she'd used to disappear. When his face appeared anyway, and it did, in the early mornings especially, in that particular unguarded moment between sleep and waking when the brain hasn't yet engaged its defenses, she got up and put the kettle on and stood at the window looking at the mountains until it passed. She did not think about him, but she thought about the coffee, sometimes. She was 6 months along when her neighbor, Doris, a 60-something retired schoolteacher with excellent instincts and terrible boundaries, sat down across from her at the kitchen table and said, without preamble, "Whoever he is, he doesn't deserve to not know." Vivian kept her eyes on her mug. "You don't know anything about it." "No," Doris agreed, "but I know what a woman carrying someone else's secret looks like. Been one myself." A pause. "I'm not telling you to go back. I'm telling you to think about what you're building here." "I'm building a life." "You're building a wall," Doris said. "They're not the same thing." Vivian didn't answer. She named the baby Elena. She decided on the name at 7 months, in the waiting room of the obstetrician's office, leafing through a magazine she wasn't reading. Elena. She didn't know why. It simply felt like the name of a person capable of surviving things, which felt like the most important quality available. Elena Rose Hale was born at 4:17 in the morning on a Tuesday in March, in a hospital that smelled of industrial cleaner and the particular exhausted efficiency of medical institutions running at capacity. Vivian had no one in the room with her. She had asked Doris to wait outside. That had not been because she didn't want company. It had been because she knew, with a certainty she couldn't explain, that this was something she needed to do in her own bones, in her own body, with no witnesses to how hard it was. It was very hard. And then it wasn't, because Elena arrived, red and furious and magnificently loud, and Vivian held her and felt something shift in the center of her chest. Something so fundamental that it reorganized everything around it, the way a fault line reorganizes the landscape above it. She thought of Dante. Not the Dante of the 4-inch gap and the lipstick on the collar. The other one. The one who made coffee in the morning and remembered she hated carnations. She thought of what that Dante would have looked like in this room, at this moment, and the grief that arrived with that thought was different from the earlier grief. Quieter, more resigned. The grief of a door that has been closed and locked, and the key thrown somewhere unretrievable. She didn't call him. She had not called him. She would not call him. Elena learned to hold her own head up. Elena learned to smile. Elena grew eyelashes that were absurdly long and dark, and eyes that were— Vivian registered this with a complicated internal stillness every time she looked at them, unmistakably Dante's. The same exact shade, the same slight downward turn at the outer corners that made them look both serious and, when she laughed, devastating. 4 years passed. Vivian didn't count them the way she'd feared she might. She simply lived them. The nonprofit promoted her twice. She moved into her own apartment, small, with a window that looked out onto a courtyard where someone kept a container garden of tomatoes. Elena started at the kindergarten 3 blocks away. Vivian packed her lunch every morning. The same lunch, roughly. Half a sandwich, cut in triangles because Elena had opinions about geometry, apple slices, a small bag of crackers. It was the lunch of a regular life, an ordinary Tuesday, the kind of life that had once seemed impossible and had become, with sufficient time and stubbornness, simply hers. She had stopped building the wall around Dante's memory. It wasn't that she'd taken it down, more that it had become unnecessary. The wound had scar tissue. She could look at it without flinching now. She could acknowledge that she had loved him, genuinely and completely, and that the marriage had ended the only way it could have ended once she'd seen what she'd seen, and that she had made the only choices available to her, and that those choices had given her Elena, and that Elena was, against all odds, against the wreckage that had produced her, entirely, uncomplicated good. That was where things stood on the October afternoon that Vivian came home from the grocery store and found the black car parked in front of her building. Not an Oregon car. She knew that immediately, the way you know things that exist at the intersection of instinct and dread. The plates were wrong. The car was too clean, too specifically positioned, angled slightly away from the curb in a way that wasn't careless, that was in fact very deliberate, in the way that men trained to monitor exits and sightlines are deliberate. She stood on the sidewalk with her grocery bags and her breathing went shallow, and for one long, terrible second, she was 29 years old again, standing in a hotel room in Manhattan, making decisions in the dark. Then the car door opened, and Dante Moretti stepped out onto a sidewalk in Portland, Oregon, in the gray afternoon light, and looked at her across the 4 years of silence between them. He looked different. Not older, exactly. Older in the way that men who have been through something irreversible look older, not in the lines on their face, but in the quality of stillness they carry. He was wearing a dark coat, no tie, no bodyguards visible, no other car. He stood with his hands at his sides, which was not, she knew, his natural posture. Dante Moretti was a man who occupied space differently, who held himself with the particular gravitational certainty of someone accustomed to rooms rearranging themselves around him. He looked right now like a man who was not certain he was welcome, like a man who had driven a very long way and had not allowed himself to think too carefully about what he would say when he arrived. He looked, she realized, like someone who had been surviving something. He said her name, not Vivian Moretti, not Mrs. Moretti, just Vivian. Her grocery bags were heavy. Her heart was doing something irregular. Down the street, Elena was at her after-school program for another 40 minutes. 40 minutes. "How did you find me?" Vivian said. He held her gaze. "A photograph. From a kindergarten charity event. Elena was in the background." The world went very still. "She has my eyes," he said. Not as an accusation, not as a claim, just a fact, stated quietly, the way you state things when you've had 4 years to sit with them and have arrived somewhere past anger, past strategy, into something rawer and more honest than either. Vivian's grip tightened on the grocery bags. He had found Elena. He had found them both. And now he was standing here, alone, without his army, without his lawyers, without any of the machinery that Dante Moretti could theoretically deploy when he wanted something. And he said, "I came to apologize." He paused. "Not to take her." Vivian stared at him. In 40 minutes, her daughter, his daughter, their daughter, the person who had reorganized everything, would come around that corner with her backpack and her absurd eyelashes and her opinions about sandwich geometry, and the life Vivian had built with such painful care would either survive this moment or it wouldn't. She didn't know yet which one it would be. And that, for the first time in 4 years, terrified her more than anything Dante Moretti had ever done. Vivian didn't move. That was the first thing. She simply stood on the sidewalk with the grocery bags cutting into her palms and looked at him, the way you look at something you've trained yourself not to think about for 4 years, and then suddenly it's standing in front of you in a dark coat in the gray October light, and all that training evaporates like it was nothing. "You need to leave," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. That steadiness surprised her. It didn't surprise Dante. He absorbed it the way he absorbed most things, without visible reaction, his eyes fixed on her face with an intensity she had forgotten about and was now remembering with her entire nervous system. "I'm not here to fight you," he said. "I don't care why you're here. You need to leave before—" She stopped. She recalculated. "You need to leave. Before Elena comes home," he finished. The sound of her daughter's name in his mouth was a specific kind of violence, not intentional. That almost made it worse. Don't say her name. Vivian, don't. She took one step toward him, which she hadn't planned, which her body had apparently decided on independently. You don't get to say her name. You don't get to park in front of my building and say her name like you have any claim on anything in my life. He held very still. That was the thing about Dante Moretti that she had always found simultaneously reassuring and unnerving, his capacity for stillness under pressure. Most men, when confronted, either escalated or retreated. Dante simply became more present, more there, like the argument made him denser somehow. I have a claim, he said quietly, whether either of us is comfortable with that. The grocery bags were getting heavier, or her arms were getting weaker. She couldn't tell which. You have 30 seconds to get back in that car, she said. And then what? It was a fair question, and the fact that it was a fair question made her furious in a way that the unfair ones never could. She turned and walked into her building. She did not look back to see if he followed. She could hear him, though. His footsteps on the pavement, the particular cadence she had memorized without meaning to, slightly uneven because of the old break in his left ankle that had never quite healed correctly. She heard those footsteps stop at the door. He didn't follow her in. She stood in her apartment with the grocery bags on the floor and her back against the closed door and her chest doing something that wasn't quite breathing and wasn't quite not breathing, and she stayed there for what might have been 2 minutes, or might have been 10 before she moved to the window and looked down. The black car was still there. He was leaning against the hood, arms crossed, not looking up at the window, just waiting with the particular patience of a man who has decided to wait and intends to see it through. She watched him for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and called the after-school program and told them she was running late. Could Elena please wait? Yes, 15 minutes. Thank you. She hung up. She put the groceries away. She did it slowly, deliberately, giving her hands something to do while her mind ran calculations she didn't want to be running. He was alone. That was the thing that kept snagging. In 5 years of marriage, she could count on one hand the number of times Dante Moretti had gone anywhere without at least 2 men within eye line. The empire didn't permit solitude. Solitude was a liability in his world. The fact that he was standing on a sidewalk in Portland without a single visible bodyguard was either a gesture of genuine vulnerability or the most sophisticated manipulation she'd ever witnessed. She didn't know which. That not knowing was the most dangerous thing about him. She went back down. He was still in the same position when she pushed through the door. He straightened when he saw her, unfolding his arms. Another thing she'd forgotten, that particular shift in his posture when she entered a room, as if her arrival required some physical adjustment, some reorientation. She had once found it flattering. Now she cataloged it as information. You get 10 minutes, she said. Not here. Well, there's a coffee place on the next block. Public. We talk there. All right? And Dante. She made herself hold his gaze. If you say anything about taking her, anything about custody, lawyers, any of that, I will stand up and walk out, and the next people you hear from will be mine. Something moved across his face. Not offense, closer to grief, though she refused to let that register as meaningful. I told you why I came, he said. You told me a sentence. One sentence. I don't trust sentences from you right now. He nodded once. Fair. They walked to the coffee place without speaking. It was the kind of neighborhood coffee shop that had survived by being indistinguishable from someone's living room. Mismatched chairs, a chalkboard menu, the smell of something baked hovering permanently in the air. Vivian chose a table near the window. She sat with her back to the wall, which was an instinct she hadn't had 4 years ago and apparently had now. Dante sat across from her. He looked at the table for a moment, then at her. The waitress came. Vivian ordered coffee, black. Dante asked for water. The waitress left. Talk, Vivian said. He was quiet for a moment, not collecting himself. Dante had never been a man who needed to collect himself, who fumbled for words. The pause felt more like he was deciding what order to say things in, which was more concerning because it suggested there was a great deal to say. The night you left, he started, I know what I saw. You saw 6 seconds, he said, maybe 7. You didn't see what happened after. I saw enough. No. Not aggressive, just certain. You didn't. And I need you to hear this, not because I'm asking for anything back, I'm not. I want to be clear about that. But because you've been carrying something for 4 years that isn't true, and I can't. He stopped. He pressed his jaw together. I can't let that stand anymore. Vivian said nothing. She kept her face very still. Bianca was working for the FBI, he said. The coffee arrived. Neither of them touched it. She had been for 8 months before that night. She'd been feeding them documents, financial records, communications. She was building a case. He paused. The kiss was a setup. She was wired. She kissed me to give their surveillance something they could use, to establish an intimate relationship on record, so anything she'd taken from my files could be framed as something I'd willingly shared with her. Vivian looked at him. You're telling me she kissed you? Yes. And you pushed her off. Immediately. Fired her that night. Had security remove her from the building. His eyes didn't waver. There's footage from 2 other cameras in that office. Angles you couldn't see from the door. I have copies. I've had them for 4 years. I've been trying to find a way to give them to you for 4 years. The room was doing something strange. Not spinning. She wasn't the kind of person who got theatrical about bad news, but the quality of the light felt altered somehow. The chalkboard menu on the far wall seemed very far away. Why didn't you? She stopped. She started again. You knew I saw. You knew why I left. Why didn't you? Because you were gone, he said. By the time I processed what had happened, you were gone. And then the letter arrived. Something moved in his throat. And I understood that you had left on purpose, that you had chosen to leave. And the letter said you were... He looked away for the first time, at the window, at the street, at nothing in particular. It said you were carrying our child. The silence between them was extensive. I looked for you, he said, still not looking at her. For 4 years I looked for you. I canceled meetings. I shut down operations. I had people in 30 cities. He turned back to her. You were very good at disappearing. I had good teachers, she said. Living with you for 5 years is an education. Something in that landed on him visibly, a small, precise wound. He absorbed it without comment. Why now? She said. The kindergarten photo. You could have been tracking us since Elena started school. That's over a year. 8 months, he said. I found the photo 8 months ago. And you waited 8 months. I needed to be sure of what I was doing before I showed up in front of you. He put both hands flat on the table, a gesture she recognized as his version of transparency. I didn't want to arrive as what I was. I needed to arrive as something different. And what are you now? A long pause. I don't know yet, but I'm not that anymore. She studied him. The lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. The way he was holding his shoulders, less contained than she remembered. Something slightly loosened in his posture, as if a permanent tension had been surgically removed. The absence of the ring he had worn on his right hand, a family piece, 3 generations old. She noticed it now and said nothing. You dissolved the organization, she said. It wasn't a question. She'd been careful not to follow news about him, but some things reach you anyway, through the background radiation of the world. There had been rumors 18 months ago. Structural changes in the Moretti holdings, key figures in the organization surfacing in unexpected legal contexts, the kind of systematic unwinding that only happens when the person at the top has made a decision and is enforcing it with the same absolutism they once used to enforce everything else. Most of it, he said. The rest is going. It takes time to do it cleanly without people getting hurt. Why? He looked at her directly. Because of her. Vivian felt something tighten in her sternum. Don't do that. Don't make her responsible for your choices. She's not responsible. She's the reason. He said it without apology. There's a difference. I looked at that photograph for weeks, Vivian. She has your jawline and my eyes, and she was standing in a kindergarten gymnasium raising money for kids who need school supplies, and she doesn't know anything about me except that I don't exist. He stopped. I can't. Another stop. The stops were the most honest thing about this conversation, she realized. The places where his language ran out. I can't be what I was and be her father. Those two things cannot coexist. Why, Vivian picked up her coffee. She held it without drinking. You're not her father, she said. Her voice was careful and deliberate, and she meant every word. You're her biology. That's different. He absorbed that too. It cost him. She could see it cost him. And he didn't fight it. I know, he said. You can't walk back in and be her father. You cannot do that to her. She's 4. She has a life. She has routines and she has friends, and she has a way the world works in her head. And you cannot... Her voice tightened in a way she hadn't authorized. She paused. She pressed it back down. You cannot be a story she hears one day. You have to be a decision, a real one, with consequences and consistency and time. That is what fatherhood is. I know that. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, you just showed up. You parked in front of my building and you showed up, which is exactly the kind of thing a man does when he's thought about himself and not about her. The words hit the table between them like something thrown. He didn't flinch. You're right, he said. I know I'm right. I'm not arguing with you. You never argue with me when I'm right. That was always the thing. She stopped herself. She was not doing this. She was not having this conversation. This is not a reconciliation. I want to be clear. Whatever you came here thinking, I came here to tell you the truth and to ask you to consider letting me know my daughter. He said it flat and simple. That's it. That's all of it. I'm not asking for anything else. You don't get to just ask for that. No, he agreed. I don't. That's why I'm asking. He held her gaze. There's a difference between taking something and asking for it. I'm asking. She looked at him for a long time. She thought about Elena's eyes. She thought about every morning she'd watched her daughter laugh at something on the kitchen floor, or demand a specific cup, or fall asleep mid-sentence during a bedtime story with her dark lashes against her cheeks, and felt the complicated, specific ache of knowing there was a whole half of this child that came from somewhere Vivian couldn't explain to her, couldn't map or account for, because that half had a face and a name, and Vivian had chosen silence. She didn't answer him. She said, I have to pick up my daughter. She stood up. She put money on the table. He started to protest, and she looked at him once, and he stopped. At the door, she turned back. Come back tomorrow, she said. 10 o'clock. Here. She paused. I'm not promising anything. I'm giving you one more conversation. Don't mistake that for anything it isn't. He nodded. She walked out into the October air and went to collect Elena from the after-school program. And her daughter came running across the gymnasium floor in her sneakers with the Velcro straps she was still mastering, and slammed into Vivian's legs at full speed the way she always did. And Vivian held her and breathed into the top of her head and thought, with a clarity that was almost painful, this is what's real. This is the only thing that matters. She was almost certain she believed it. She did not sleep that night. She lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and went through the conversation the way you go through something you're trying to find the falseness in, searching for the seam, the place where his story didn't hold. The FBI angle, the footage, the setup. She turned it over and examined every surface. The trouble was that it was coherent. More than coherent, it was the kind of thing that, in Dante's world, was not only plausible, but practically inevitable. She knew enough about how federal prosecutors built organized crime cases to know that informants were the currency of those investigations, that the most effective informants were always people who had earned a subject's proximity, and that the strategies they used were sometimes appallingly personal. She knew it was possible. She didn't know if it was true. That distinction felt like the only solid ground she had left, and she was going to stand on it until morning. She was in the coffee shop at 9:50 the next day when her phone rang. Unknown number. Oregon area code, but not one she recognized. She almost didn't answer. Some reflex made her pick up. The voice was female, low, with a slight accent she couldn't immediately place. Italian, maybe, or something adjacent. Mrs. Moretti, the voice said. Everything in Vivian's body went cold. You don't know me, the voice continued. But I think by now Dante has told you who I am. My name is Bianca Rossi. A pause, timed with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this. And I need you to understand something before you make any decisions about your daughter. Vivian's hand tightened around the phone. You're going to want to listen to what I have to say, Bianca said. Because if Dante is telling you his version of events, you're only getting half the picture. And the other half? Another pause. Involves Elena. The door to the coffee shop opened. Dante walked in, checked his watch, saw Vivian's face, and stopped. He crossed the room in 4 steps, and she held up one hand. Stop. And he stopped, reading her expression with the quickness of a man trained to read rooms, his body shifting into alertness, his eyes dropping to the phone pressed against her ear. "What do you want?" Vivian said into the phone, and Bianca Rossi told her. And the ground under every decision Vivian had made in the last 24 hours opened up beneath her feet and dropped her into something she had no map for and no preparation against, because what Bianca said in the next 40 seconds was not a negotiation or an explanation or even a threat in the conventional sense. It was a location, specific and verifiable, and the name of the kindergarten 3 blocks from Vivian's apartment, and the time Elena's program ended every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, and the words, "She's a beautiful little girl. I'd hate for anything to disrupt her routine." Vivian lowered the phone. She did it slowly, the way you lower something fragile, though the phone was not fragile and her hand was not steady. The call had already ended. Bianca had hung up after those last words, clean and precise, the way you hang up when you've delivered exactly what you intended and have nothing left to add. Dante was still standing 3 feet away. He hadn't moved since she'd held up her hand. He was reading her face now, with an attention that was almost clinical, his eyes moving across her expression the way a doctor's hands move across an injury, searching, cataloging, not yet interpreting. "Who was that?" he said. Not a question. Vivian set the phone face down on the table. "Bianca," she said. The name did something to his face. Not surprise. The surprise was already gone, replaced by something harder and faster, a specific alertness that she remembered from the rare moments in their marriage when something had gone genuinely wrong. His jaw set. His shoulders dropped by a fraction, which in Dante's physical vocabulary meant he was pulling inward, consolidating, the way a person does before they move. What did she say? She knows Elena's school. She knows the schedule. Vivian's voice was flat. She was keeping it flat with effort. She said she'd hate for anything to disrupt her routine. He said a word under his breath that she hadn't heard from him in 4 years and had forgotten the particular texture of. "Sit down," Vivian said. "Vivian." "Sit down, Dante." He sat. He put both hands on the table and looked at them. And for one brief unguarded moment, he looked like a man who has just watched a carefully constructed wall come down. Not with drama, but with the quiet inevitability of something that was always going to fall. "How long has she been in Portland?" Vivian said. "I don't know." Wrong answer. "I genuinely do not know." He looked up. "I didn't tell anyone I was coming here, not a single person. I came alone, I used cash, I drove up from San Francisco, no flights. There is no trail from me to this city." "Then how did she find us?" He was quiet for a moment. Working it, she could see him working it, running the same backward calculation she'd been running since the call ended. "She found you before I did," he said slowly. "Or at the same time. She's been tracking the same networks I was using. She knows my methods. She worked with me for 2 years. If she found the photograph, she was monitoring you. She's been monitoring everything connected to me. The FBI case collapsed. She gave them evidence they couldn't use without exposing their own procedural violations. She walked legally. But she burned every bridge she had. The Bureau doesn't protect burned assets." He pressed his fingers against the table. "She has nothing left except whatever she thinks I owe her. And she thinks you owe her a great deal." "Apparently." Vivian stood up. "I need to go get my daughter," she said. He was on his feet before the sentence finished. "I'll come with you." "No." The word came out like something struck from iron. "Vivian, if Bianca is in this city and she knows Elena's location, you being next to me makes it worse. If she sees us together, if she thinks I've let you back in, she loses whatever leverage she thinks the threat gives her." Vivian picked up her jacket. Her hands were moving with a competence her body was providing independent of her mind. "I go alone. I pick Elena up early. I bring her home. Then you and I figure out what to do." He looked at her. She could see him calculating the argument, weighing it against her expression, reaching the conclusion that she was right and that fighting her on it would cost more than it was worth. "My number," he said. He took a card from his coat, plain, white, just a number, and put it on the table. The moment you have her. The moment you're both inside. She took the card without looking at it and walked out. The 3 blocks to the school felt like 3 miles. Vivian walked them at a pace just below a run, her eyes moving constantly. Parked cars, doorways, the woman on the corner with the stroller, the man outside the hardware store reading his phone. 4 years of deliberately forgetting how to see a city as a threat map, and now the skill was back, fully assembled, like it had been waiting in storage. The kindergarten was in a low brick building with a painted mural on the exterior wall, children holding hands in a chain of bright, improbable colors. Vivian had always liked that mural. She registered now that she was cataloging the sightlines from it. Elena was in the gym. Wednesday was art day, and she was still at the craft table when Vivian appeared in the doorway, and she looked up with paint on her left hand and said, "Mama, I'm not done," with the serene authority of a 4-year-old who has not yet learned that the adult determines when things are done. "We're going early today, Bug." Vivian kept her voice easy. "Bring your painting." Elena considered this with the gravity it deserved and apparently decided the painting was portable enough. She carried it at arm's length all the way to the front door, paint side out, explaining its content with the detailed narrative that accompanied most of her art. Vivian watched the street while she buckled Elena into the stroller. She saw nothing that alarmed her. That didn't make her feel better. The things you don't see are often the ones that matter. They were back in the apartment in 11 minutes. She texted the number on the card. "We're inside." The reply came in under 30 seconds. "I'm outside your building, front entrance." She stood at the window and looked down. He was there, hands in his pockets, positioned at an angle to the door that gave him visibility on both directions of the street. She watched him for a moment, the stillness, the controlled attention, the way he looked at every person who passed without appearing to look, and felt something she didn't want to feel, which was the specific, unwelcome recognition that whatever else had happened and whatever had broken between them, this particular version of Dante Moretti was exactly what was standing between her daughter and a woman who had just demonstrated she knew where Elena went to school. She buzzed him up. He came in and crouched immediately to Elena's level, which Vivian had not anticipated and which ambushed her completely. He didn't reach for the child. He didn't perform warmth. He just got down to her height and looked at the painting Elena was still carrying and said, with what appeared to be genuine attention, "Is that a horse?" Elena looked at him with 4-year-old assessment. "It's a dragon. I can see that now. Dragons are better than horses." "Probably true." He tilted his head. "What's his name?" "Her name," Elena said, with the precision of someone correcting a fundamental error. "It's Beatrice." Something moved across Dante's face that he controlled almost completely. Almost. "That's a good name," he said. Elena accepted this verdict and went to put Beatrice on the refrigerator with the existing gallery of paintings held up by vegetable-shaped magnets. Dante stood up. He and Vivian looked at each other across the kitchen. "She's extraordinary," he said quietly. "I know that," Vivian said. "Tell me about Bianca." They sat at the kitchen table while Elena set up an elaborate scenario in the living room involving a stuffed rabbit and what appeared to be a courtroom drama. Dante kept his voice low, and Vivian kept one ear permanently on her daughter, and they went through it. Bianca Rossi had been recruited by the FBI's Organized Crime Division 14 months after she started working for Dante. They had approached her with evidence of her own financial irregularities. Small ones, but enough. She had agreed to cooperate. For 8 months, she had been walking a line that would have destroyed most people, maintaining her professional relationship with Dante while systematically copying every sensitive document she could access. The kiss had been the operation's final move. Surveillance had everything they needed on paper, but wanted something that humanized the target, something that would play in front of a jury. An intimate relationship established on record. Bianca had been instructed to create one. She had done exactly that, on the night of Dante's 5th wedding anniversary in his office, while his wife stood 4 inches away on the other side of a door. "She didn't know I was there," Vivian said. It wasn't quite a question. "No, she knew it was your anniversary. She knew you might come to the office." Dante's voice was carefully neutral. "I don't know if she considered the possibility that you would actually be there, or whether she simply didn't factor it in." "She factored it in," Vivian said. He looked at her. "She factored it in because it was useful," Vivian said. "A wife who walks in on that specific scene and leaves." That's not collateral damage. That's leverage. If I went to anyone, if I talked, I would have confirmed the intimate relationship she was trying to establish. She watched his face process this. She used me. The silence in the kitchen had a particular weight. The case collapsed anyway, Dante said. The footage from the other cameras contradicted the surveillance recording. Their own procedural violations with the evidence chain. I don't care about the case. Vivian's voice was very quiet. I care that I left. I care that I took my daughter and I disappeared and I spent 4 years believing... She stopped. The sentence had too many endings and none of them were ones she wanted to say aloud in front of him. I spent 4 years on a lie that she constructed. Yes. And now she's here in my city, using Elena. Yes. Why? She leaned forward. She's out. She walked. The FBI burned her, but she's legally free. What does she want? Dante was quiet for a moment. Money. A significant amount. She reached out to my legal team 6 weeks ago. I didn't connect it to Portland because I hadn't found you yet. Hadn't made the connection that she might have found you first. She wanted a wire transfer in exchange for, as she put it, disappearing permanently and making no further claims on anyone connected to the Moretti name. You didn't pay her. No. Why not? He looked at her steadily. Because paying her would have been an admission that she had something worth paying for. And because men in my former position who pay that kind of demand once, pay it forever. So she escalated. She escalated. Vivian sat back. She pressed her fingertips against the table's surface. In the living room, Elena had apparently reached a verdict in the stuffed rabbits case and was now announcing the sentence to the assembled toys with considerable legal authority. What does she actually have? Vivian said. You said the FBI case collapsed. What does she still hold? Financial records. Copies of documents that were never submitted to the federal case. She held them back, probably for exactly this situation. In the wrong hands, in the right jurisdiction, they could still cause problems. He paused. And she has photographs. Of Elena. Which means she's been physically close enough to take them. The temperature in Vivian's body dropped approximately 10 degrees. When? She said. I don't know. The photograph she would have found through the charity event, the one I found, was publicly available. The others she referenced in her message to my legal team were not publicly available. They were taken within the last few months. She's been watching us. Vivian's voice had gone somewhere very flat and very cold. For months. She's been watching my daughter. I think so. And you came to Portland without telling me any of this. The accusation landed between them. He didn't attempt to deflect it. I came to Portland before I understood the full scope of what she was doing, he said. I knew about the contact with my legal team. I did not know she had located you. If I had known... What? What would you have done differently? I would have come with resources. People I trust. I would have come prepared. Instead, you came with a dark coat and a speech about apologizing. Yes. Flat, honest, entirely without self-defense. Vivian stood up. She walked to the window. The street below was ordinary. A woman walking a dog. A teenager on a bike. The bodega on the corner with its hand-lettered sign. She had walked that street approximately 800 times. She knew every crack in the pavement. And somewhere in that ordinary afternoon geometry, Bianca Rossi had stood close enough to photograph her daughter. I need to call my sister, Vivian said. All right. And you need to call whoever it is you call now that you've dissolved the organization. There are people I still trust, former employees who went legitimate. There are also... He paused. There are people in law enforcement I have existing arrangements with, not FBI, local jurisdictions, people who have reasons to help me outside of official channels. Semi-legitimate at best. Yes. You're going to use them anyway. If you give me the word... She turned from the window. Elena had migrated to the kitchen doorway and was looking at Dante with the frank assessment of a child who has classified a stranger and is now performing additional analysis. You have big hands, Elena announced. Dante looked down at his hands. I do. My friend Cooper has big hands. He's good at catching things. Is he? Are you good at catching things? A pause. Something in his expression that Vivian couldn't quite read. I'm working on it, he said. Elena accepted this philosophically and went back to the living room. Vivian watched her go. She watched the empty doorway for a moment after her daughter disappeared through it. "One call," she told Dante. "You make one call to whoever you trust. You tell them where we are and that we need eyes on this building and on Elena's school. Tonight. Discreet." She met his gaze. "And then tomorrow morning, we find out what Bianca actually wants and how to end this without my daughter knowing any of it is happening." "Agreed. And Dante." She held his gaze without flinching. "If anything you've told me turns out to be a version of the truth rather than the truth, if there's anything about this situation you're managing instead of telling me, I will take Elena somewhere you will never find us again. Not in 4 years. Not in 40. Do you understand me?" He held her gaze with complete steadiness. "I understand." She believed him. That was the thing. She believed him, and she didn't entirely trust that believing him was a reliable guide to anything. She put Elena to bed at 7:30. It took 3 attempts because Elena had opinions about which stuffed animals were allowed in the bed that evening, and these opinions required negotiation. Vivian sat on the edge of the mattress long after Elena's breathing evened out, and the small body went fully slack the way children's bodies do in sleep. Complete, immediate, unconscious trust in the safety of the moment. She sat there in the dark and thought about what she'd spent 4 years building. The job, the apartment, the friends she'd made carefully and at close range, choosing them the way you choose things when you've been burned. Slowly, skeptically, with attention to their edges. The routine, the after-school program, the lunch cut in triangles, the tomato plants in the courtyard she'd started tending in the spring because the man who'd planted them had moved away and she couldn't stand watching them die. The ordinary, specific, improbable life she had assembled out of the wreckage of a night 5 years ago. Bianca Rossi had been inside that life, had stood close enough to photograph it, had looked at Elena through some lens. In some moment Vivian hadn't been watching and had decided to make her a currency. Vivian came out of the bedroom and found Dante standing at the kitchen counter with 2 cups of coffee. He'd found the coffee maker. He'd found the mugs. He had, without being asked or directed, made her coffee exactly the way she took it. She sat down. She took the mug. She didn't say anything about the coffee. She didn't have to. "My contact confirmed 2 cars in the vicinity of the building," Dante said quietly. "Not mine. Not local plates. He's running them now." "She has people with her." "It appears so." "Can your contact—" "He can maintain surveillance through tonight and into tomorrow morning. After that, if we want to move against her position, we need to make a decision about how." Vivian wrapped both hands around the mug. "She called me to tell me she's close. She didn't have to do that. She chose to." "She wanted you frightened. Or she wanted us together." Vivian looked at him. "Think about it. She threatens Elena. You're here. What's the natural next move for a man like you?" He was quiet. She watched him arrive at it. "I bring resources in," he said slowly. "I expose my network, whoever I still have, whoever I trust enough to call. I show her the shape of what I have left. And then she knows exactly what she's dealing with." "She's mapping my remaining capabilities," he said. He set down his own cup. "She doesn't just want money. She wants to know what I still have so she can determine how much to ask for." He paused. "Or whether I'm worth more as leverage than as a payment." "Leverage against who?" The question sat there. "She walked away from the FBI," Vivian said. "But she still has the documents. She still has evidence of crimes that weren't part of the federal case. There are other parties who might pay a great deal for that information. People who aren't law enforcement. People from your former world who have reasons to want you exposed or controlled." She watched his face. "She's not running a solo operation. Someone is backing her." Dante was very still. "If that's true," he said carefully, "then this is not about money. This was never about money. No. This is about getting me back into the room." His voice had changed. A subtle shift in register, something underneath it that she hadn't heard before. Something that sounded, she realized, like fear. Not for himself. "They want leverage over me. Something I'll act to protect." "Yes." He looked at the hallway that led to Elena's bedroom. "They've been watching long enough to know what matters," Vivian said. She kept her voice very level. She needed it level. Elena isn't a threat. She's bait. They use Bianca to bring us together because a man protecting his child is a man who can be controlled. The refrigerator hummed. Beatrice the dragon looked out from between the vegetable magnets. Then we can't run, Dante said. If we run with Elena, we confirm she's the pressure point. We make it worse. I know. And we can't use my contacts to move against Bianca's position without exposing exactly what those contacts are. I know that too. He looked at her. What do we do? Vivian put down the coffee cup. She thought about something Doris had said to her years ago, in a different kitchen, in a different life. You're not building a life, you're building a wall. And she thought about what happened when you stopped defending the perimeter and instead changed what was worth defending. We give her what she wants, Vivian said. Dante frowned. We pay her? No. We give her you. She held his gaze. We give her access to Dante Moretti walking back into his world. We let her think the threat worked. We let her think Elena is the lever she needed and that you're going to cooperate. She paused. And then you walk into whatever meeting she sets up, alone, and you get her to show us who's behind her. The silence lasted a full 10 seconds. That's not a plan, Dante said. That's a trap with me as the bait. Yes, Vivian said. It is. If whoever is behind her decides the meeting is easier than the negotiation, I know the risk. You're asking me to walk into a room with no backup and no guarantee. I'm asking you, Vivian said, to do the only thing that ends this without Elena ever knowing it happened. She held his gaze. You said you came here to be something different. You said you couldn't be what you were and be her father. This is where that starts. A pause. Or doesn't. He looked at her for a long time. She didn't look away. Outside, in the dark street below the apartment window, one of the cars her husband's contact had flagged moved slowly past the building and then passed again. And Dante's phone lit up with a text that read simply, "Third pass. They're confirming occupancy." And Elena slept in the back room, entirely safe, entirely unaware, one arm thrown around Beatrice the dragon, trusting with the whole unguarded faith of a child that the world on the other side of her bedroom door was the one she knew. Dante picked up his phone. I'll make the call, he said. The call took 11 minutes. Vivian sat at the kitchen table and listened to Dante's half of it, clipped, precise, the Italian sliding in and out of the English in a way she'd once found musical and now found simply functional, a tool being used. He gave coordinates. He gave timelines. He asked 2 questions and received answers that made him close his eyes briefly, the way people close their eyes when information lands somewhere tender. When he hung up, he stood at the counter for a moment with his back to her. Marco is in Seattle, he said. He can be here by 4 a.m. He's bringing 2 others. People I'd trust with. He stopped. People I trust. What else? He turned around. Bianca's not running this alone. Marco has a name. A man named Carver. Not connected to anything Italian. Not organized crime in the traditional sense. He's a fixer. The kind of person who brokers information between parties who can't be seen in the same room. He paused. He has buyers for the documents Bianca is holding. Multiple buyers. Some of them would use those documents to control me. Some of them would use them to simply erase the problem. Erase meaning. Meaning I wouldn't be a problem anymore. Vivian absorbed this without expression. So we're not just dealing with Bianca. No. Bianca is the delivery mechanism. Carver is the operation. And Carver knows about Elena. Carver identified Elena as the leverage point. This was almost certainly his strategy from the start. Bianca is... He chose the word carefully. Bianca is being used, the same way she used me, the same way she used you. Something crossed his face that was adjacent to contempt, but had more grief in it than contempt usually carries. She thought she was running her own play. She's been someone else's piece the entire time. Vivian thought about this. She thought about a woman who had spent years feeding information to federal agents, who had watched her case collapse, who had walked out legally clean but professionally destroyed and personally exposed, and who had then been approached by someone who offered her a path to recoup everything she'd lost. She thought about how that offer would have looked, how reasonable, how achievable. She thought about how traps always look like doors. The plan still holds, she said. You go to Bianca. She brings Carver in, thinking she's presenting a controlled asset. We get Carver visible. And then what? Marco's people move? Your contact in local law enforcement. He can be there. But if Carver has cover, he won't move fast enough to establish cover if we set the meeting for tomorrow morning. Vivian stood up. She called me today. She's ready to move now. She's been ready. She was just waiting for you to arrive. She didn't expect you to already be here. She looked at him. That's our window. She's not fully set. We push it before Carver can build his perimeter. Dante studied her. You've been thinking about this longer than tonight. I've been thinking about how to protect my daughter for 4 years, she said. I've just been thinking about the wrong threats. He made 2 more calls. She listened to both. The second one she understood less of, a name she didn't recognize, an address in the Pearl District, the kind of conversation that operated in implication and established code rather than explicit instruction. When he finished, he looked at her with something that might have been apology. The things I know how to do, he said. They're not clean. I know what you are, she said. Use it. She did not sleep. She sat in the chair beside Elena's bed and watched her daughter breathe. The slow, even, unconscious rhythm of a child who has no idea that the adults in her orbit are making decisions at a kitchen table that will determine the shape of her future. Elena had one arm over her eyes, which was a new sleeping habit she'd acquired in the last month, and which Vivian found both endearing and slightly heartbreaking. The way all developmental changes were simultaneously a small joy and a small loss. She was still there when the light outside the window shifted from black to the particular dark blue that precedes dawn, and when she heard the quiet knock at the front door that meant Marco had arrived. She came out of the bedroom and pulled the door shut behind her. Marco Vitali was not what she'd expected, though she recognized she'd built an expectation from an image that was probably 5 years out of date. He was somewhere in his late 50s, compact, with the look of a man who had spent a long time being overlooked by design. He had 2 people with him, a woman Vivian's age who introduced herself only as Ray, and a younger man who didn't introduce himself at all and stationed himself near the apartment door with the practiced invisibility of someone who has made standing in doorways his profession. Marco looked at Dante, then he looked at the closed bedroom door, then he looked at Vivian. She's safe, he said. Not a question, an assessment. She's asleep, Vivian said. She's going to stay that way, and when she wakes up, this is going to be a normal morning. She goes to school. Marco glanced at Dante. She goes to school, Dante confirmed. Ray goes with her. Vivian had not agreed to this. She looked at Ray. Ray looked back at her with the particular levelness of a woman who has been looked at skeptically many times and has long since stopped finding it interesting. I have a daughter, Ray said. 7. I know how to be a mom picking up a kid from school. You're not her mom. No. But I look like one. And I look like I belong in that neighborhood, and I will keep eyes on her for every second she's outside this apartment. She held Vivian's gaze. Your call. Vivian looked at her for another 3 seconds. Fine. They worked through the night. Marco had information that filled in the gaps in what Dante had pieced together. Carver's methodology, his usual pattern for these kinds of operations, the location he'd used for 2 previous meetings in the Pacific Northwest, a shipping facility on the waterfront, north of the Central District. Not abandoned, precisely. It was a legitimate business, a marine equipment supplier, but the ownership structure ran through 3 holding companies, and the night supervisor was on Carver's payroll. He'll want to meet there, Marco said. It's his space. He controls the exits. Then we don't let him set the location, Vivian said. 3 heads turned toward her. She ignored the implied surprise. Dante contacts Bianca this morning. He tells her he's willing to negotiate, but he's not going to a location she chooses. He offers neutral ground. She won't go for neutral ground, Marco said. Carver won't allow it. Carver will, Dante said slowly, working it out. If Bianca tells him I'm resistant, he'll adjust. He wants me compliant more than he wants home advantage. He'll give on location to get compliance. He looked at Vivian. You're thinking he'll have surveillance on whatever location we name? Yes. We name a location we've already seeded with your contact. Marco and Dante exchanged a look. Marco's expression did something brief and complicated that might have been respect. The Mercer Building, Marco said. Conference room on the 2nd floor. I can have it covered in 2 hours. Do it, Dante said. At 6:15 a.m., Dante sent a text to the number Bianca had called from. Short, factual. Willing to discuss terms. Neutral location. 10 a.m. I'll send address. He put the phone on the table and they all looked at it. The response came in 4 minutes. Send the address. Vivian watched Dante's face as he typed it. He was composed in the way that people who have spent their lives managing high-stakes negotiations are composed, surface flat, everything operational below. She had seen this face across dinner tables and in the back seats of cars, and once, memorably, during a conversation with a city councilman that had made her understand for the first time exactly what kind of man she had married. She had always found it slightly frightening. She found it right now something closer to necessary. Elena woke at 7. She wanted the blue cup, not the green one. She wanted her hair in 2 braids, not 1. She wanted to know why the man with the big hands was asleep on the couch, and Vivian said he was a friend who had driven a long way and needed to rest, and Elena considered this explanation and accepted it with the philosophical pragmatism she brought to most unexpected situations. Dante was not asleep. He opened his eyes when Elena walked past the couch, and he looked at her, in that unguarded early morning moment, with an expression that Vivian saw from the kitchen doorway and turned away from because it was not something she had the capacity to process right now. Ray took Elena at 8:30. Elena went without complaint because Ray had produced a set of small stickers from her pocket at the precise moment when compliance might have become an issue, and this was either professional skill or actual parenting instinct, and Vivian decided she didn't need to categorize it. She watched them leave from the window. Ray's hand easy and natural on the stroller handle, Elena already deep in sticker diplomacy. And then she turned back to the apartment. Dante was standing in the center of the room in his jacket. "It's time," he said. "I know. You stay here. Marco's man stays with you." "That's not what we discussed." "Vivian, I need to be able to see," she said. "Not in the room, not close, but I need eyes on the building, and I need a phone line to Marco, and I need to know what's happening when it's happening." She held his gaze. "Don't tell me to stay in the apartment. Don't make me have this argument with you." He looked at her for a long moment. "There's a coffee shop across the street from the Mercer building," he said. "Window table. You stay there. Marco's frequency in your ear." He reached into his jacket and produced what looked like an ordinary wireless earbud. "You hear everything I hear." She took it. They arrived at the Mercer building at 9:45. Vivian went to the coffee shop. Dante and Marco went inside. The silent young man materialized somewhere on the street outside with the newspaper he used as camouflage, and Vivian sat at a window table with a coffee she wasn't going to drink and put the earbud in her left ear and waited. At 3 minutes past 10, she heard through the earbud the sound of a door opening. Bianca Rossi's voice was lower than Vivian had imagined. Composed. The voice of a woman who has decided something and arrived at a kind of cold peace with it. "Dante," she said. "Bianca." His voice was completely neutral. A tone Vivian recognized. The negotiation register, the voice that revealed precisely nothing. "You look tired." Long drive. A pause. Movement sounds. Chairs, maybe. The acoustic quality of a medium-sized room. "You didn't bring anyone," Bianca said. It was an observation, not a question. "You didn't specify." "I specified neutral ground. This isn't neutral. This is a building Marco Vitali's company leased 18 months ago." A beat of silence. "I did my homework," Bianca said. There was something in her voice that might have been satisfaction. "You think I don't know your assets? I spent 2 years learning how you operate." "Then you know I'm here to negotiate," Dante said, "not to threaten. I know you're here to find out who I'm working with." A pause. "You might as well ask directly. We're past the point where either of us needs to be subtle." Vivian's hand tightened around her coffee cup. "Carver," Dante said. A silence, then, "He said you'd know the name." "Where is he?" "Not here. He'll join us when he's satisfied this isn't a setup." "This isn't a setup." Dante." Bianca's voice shifted into something wearier. "Everything you do is a setup. That's not an insult, it's just accurate." A pause. "He'll come in when I tell him it's clear. That means you have about 10 minutes to say whatever you came here to say to me before this becomes his conversation." In the coffee shop, Vivian pressed the earbud harder against her ear. She was watching the street. A man she didn't recognize had been standing outside the building for 6 minutes, long enough to be notable, not long enough to be certain. She typed a description to Marco's number. The response came back in under a minute. That's Carver's man. There are 2 more. East side, near the parking structure, 3 visible, which meant others she couldn't see. She texted, "How many inside?" "Carver's not inside yet. He's in a vehicle 1 block east, waiting for Bianca's signal." She stared at that. Carver was outside, which meant if they were going to get him visible, on record, in the presence of Dante and whatever recording equipment Marco had seated in that room, Bianca had to invite him in. And Bianca would only do that if she believed she was in control of the situation, which meant Dante needed to give her something that felt like victory. Vivian typed, "Dante needs to concede something. Give her a win. Tell him." 30 seconds of silence. Then, through the earbud, Marco's voice, barely above a murmur, the kind of voice that carries only to the person it's aimed at. "Give her the account." A 2-second pause in the room. Then Dante's voice, easy and unhurried, "I'm prepared to authorize a transfer. The amount you initially requested. Full, clean, untraceable." A pause. "I need Carver in the room when we finalize it. I need to know who I'm settling with." Silence. Bianca said, "Why?" "Because I don't make final payments to intermediaries. Whoever holds those documents, I settle with them directly. That's how I've always operated. You know that." A longer silence. Vivian could feel Bianca working the calculation. The suspicion against the pull of the money, the years of anger against the possibility of resolution. She thought about what it would feel like to be Bianca Rossi in that moment, to have burned everything, to have gambled everything on this play, and to have the finish line suddenly 1 phone call away. She heard Bianca exhale. She heard the sound of a phone being dialed. And 3 minutes later, she heard a door open and footsteps, and a man's voice she didn't recognize, flat, Midwestern, professionally affectless, say, "Mr. Moretti, I've been looking forward to this." Vivian's phone lit up. Marco. "Carver is in the building, recording active, contact is live." She pressed both hands flat on the table. Through the earbud, she heard Dante say with complete steadiness, "Mr. Carver, before we discuss the transfer, I want to make sure we have a clear understanding of the terms." "Of course." "All documents, all copies, every format, verified destruction." A pause. "And my daughter's name is never spoken in connection with any of this again." A silence. Then Carver said pleasantly, "That's a reasonable request. Though I should mention, your daughter is actually the reason we're here today. You understand that." "I understand that you believe she's leverage," Dante said. His voice was still steady, completely steady. "I want to discuss what happens if you're wrong about that." "Am I?" "You used my daughter to get me in a room." A pause. "I want you to consider very carefully whether that was a good decision." Something shifted in the acoustic quality of the room, a tension that came through even over the audio. Vivian was on her feet without deciding to stand. Carver said, "Is that a threat?" "It's a clarification," Dante said. "I came here to negotiate, in good faith. That's still what I want to do." Another pause. "But I need you to understand something about the kind of man I am before we discuss terms. So there are no misunderstandings later." "Go ahead." "I dissolved my organization, my business, my operations, my connections. I walked away from all of it. You probably think that means I'm weaker, reduced." A pause. "What it actually means is that I have nothing left to protect except my daughter. And a man with nothing left to protect except one thing is not a man you want to have made an enemy of." The silence that followed was about 4 seconds long. Then everything happened at once. A sound through the earbud that might have been a chair. Carver's voice saying something sharp and clipped that she couldn't fully make out. Marco's voice, very close to the microphone. "Move!" The sound of a door. Multiple footsteps. And then a sound that stopped Vivian's heart for a full second. A single sharp crack that was unmistakable, even filtered through an earbud. Even to a woman who had spent 5 years telling herself she didn't live in a world where that sound was part of the landscape. A gunshot. Then Dante's voice, strained in a way she had never heard it strained. The steadiness finally cracked open to something underneath it that was raw and entirely human. I'm all right. Then Marco's voice, urgent. He's hit. Right side, Vivian, stay where you are. She was already out the door of the coffee shop. She crossed the street at a run, and the man outside the building, Carver's man, turned toward her, and she did not slow down. And something in her face must have communicated something that made him take one step back instead of forward, because she went through the door without being stopped, and she took the stairs because the elevator would take too long, and she came through the second-floor door into a hallway that smelled of coffee and industrial carpet and something metallic underneath both of those things. And Marco was in the doorway of the conference room with his phone to his ear, and he looked at her, and he moved aside. Dante was in a chair, not on the floor, in a chair, which meant he had made it to a chair, which meant something. His right hand was pressed against his side below his ribs. The jacket was dark. The darkness was spreading slowly in the way that darkness spreads when it's wet. He looked up when she came in. "I told you to stay across the street," he said. His voice was recognizable, present. The words were almost complaint, which meant he was conscious and thinking, which meant, "I know what you told me," she said. She crossed to him. She put her hand over his and pressed. He made a sound that was not quite a word. "Where's Carver?" "Marco's people have him," Dante said. It's not as clean as we planned. He pulled a weapon when..." He stopped, steadied. "He's contained. The recording got everything." A pause. "It's enough." "Stop talking." "Vivian, stop talking." She pressed harder. His hand under hers was tense, and she could feel his pulse through the pressure, fast but present, fast but there. "Marco called an ambulance?" "On the way," Marco said from the doorway. She looked at Dante's face. He was pale in the way that people go pale when the blood is doing something it shouldn't, but his eyes were fully focused. They were focused on her. "Elena," he said. "She's at school. Ray has her." She held his gaze. "She's fine. She's safe." He exhaled. Something in his shoulders dropped. Not from weakness, she thought, but from the release of a specific held tension, a breath that had been held since he'd walked into that room. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay," she agreed. She kept her hand over his and listened to the sound of sirens beginning somewhere below, growing closer, and she did not move, and he did not move. And for a long, terrible moment, there was nothing in the room except the two of them and the space between 4 years ago and right now, and the distance between those 2 points which had seemed, for a very long time, like something that could never be crossed, and which was now the length of a conference table in a building in Portland with blood on the carpet and an ambulance 3 blocks away, and a 4-year-old girl with a dragon named Beatrice who was at school, right now, safe, not knowing any of it, trusting that the world her mother had built around her was exactly what it appeared to be. Dante's fingers moved under her hand, not pulling away, just adjusting, shifting so that his palm was against her palm instead of under it. His hand closed around hers. She let it. Outside in the hallway, Marco was speaking in rapid, quiet Italian into his phone, and somewhere below on the street the ambulance pulled up with its lights going, and Carver was in a room at the end of the hall with 2 of Marco's people and a situation that was going to require the kind of legal machinery that took months to dismantle. And none of that was resolved. None of it was finished. And the aftermath of this morning was going to be long and complicated, and would require decisions she hadn't made yet about what came next and who she was going to be on the other side of it. But Dante's hand was around hers, and his pulse was still there, fast and imperfect and entirely present, beating against her fingers like something that had refused, despite everything, to stop. The ambulance ride took 9 minutes. Vivian knew because she counted. Not deliberately, her mind did it on its own, the way minds in crisis default to measurable things, to numbers that can be tracked and verified because everything else is too large and too uncertain to hold. 9 minutes from the Mercer building to the hospital. She sat beside the gurney and kept her hand on Dante's arm and counted the minutes and watched the paramedic work with the practiced efficiency of someone who has seen this particular category of damage enough times that it no longer requires his full emotional attention, only his technical one. Dante was conscious for all 9 minutes. He didn't talk much. At one point he looked at her and said, "You ran across the street." And she said, "Yes." And he said, "I told you not to." And she said, "I know." And that was the entirety of the conversation. And somehow it contained more than most conversations she'd had in 4 years. In the waiting room, she called Ray. "She's fine," Ray said immediately, before Vivian could speak. "We're at the school. Everything is normal. She made a friend at the sticker table and is currently negotiating a trade agreement." Vivian pressed her free hand over her eyes. "Don't bring her here. Don't change anything about the routine. I'll call you when I know how long." Her voice did something she hadn't authorized. She stopped, pressed it back. "I'll call you." "Understood," Ray said, and then quietly, "You gonna be okay?" "I don't know yet." She sat in the waiting room for 2 hours and 40 minutes. Marco came and sat beside her after the first hour. He didn't say anything useful, which was more respectful than saying something that was. He brought her coffee from the machine down the hall, which was terrible, and she drank it because her hands needed something to hold. The surgeon came out at 12:40. He was a compact man in his 50s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the bearing of someone who delivers this particular category of news frequently enough to have developed a specific register for it. Direct, not unkind, stripped of anything decorative. "The bullet didn't hit anything catastrophic," he said. "It clipped the lower right side between ribs. We had some bleeders to address, but nothing structural. He'll be sore for a considerable amount of time. He needs rest, and he needs to not do whatever he was doing that resulted in this." He looked at Vivian. "Are you his wife?" A pause. "Yes," she said, because it was still legally true, and because the alternative required more explanation than she had capacity for right now. "He's asking for you," the surgeon said. "The room they put him in was on the 3rd floor, ordinary and impersonal the way hospital rooms are designed to be, stripped of any detail that might make one patient's stay feel different from another's." Dante looked smaller in the bed than he looked anywhere else. That was the thing about hospitals. They reduced everyone to the same dimensions. The IV line ran into his left arm. The monitors were steady. He had his eyes open when she came in, tracking her from the door. She sat in the chair beside the bed. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "Carver," he said finally. "Marco says the recording is clean. Everything from the moment he walked in the room. His own words about Elena, about the documents, about the buyers." She held his gaze. "It's enough to bury him. Marco's contact is handling the formal side of it." And Bianca. This one she'd been sitting with since the waiting room. She'd had time to think about it, which meant she'd had time to arrive somewhere she hadn't expected. "She gave a statement," Vivian said, "to Marco's contact. Voluntary. She told them everything about Carver's operation, how he recruited her, how he directed the whole thing, how she thought she was in control of it, and wasn't." A pause. "She's cooperating fully." Dante looked at the ceiling. "She's protecting herself." "Yes, and also—" Vivian stopped. She made herself finish it. "She told them what she did, on your anniversary. She confirmed the setup. She confirmed the surveillance, the microphone, all of it." She paused. "She said she knew I was there, that she saw me through the window reflection before she initiated the kiss." The room was very quiet. "She knew," Dante said. "She knew." He closed his eyes briefly, opened them. "Does it change anything, knowing that she knew?" Vivian thought about it honestly, which was the only way she knew how to think about things that mattered. She thought about 29-year-old herself in the elevator, descending through the Manhattan night with the city lights rising outside the glass. She thought about the hotel room, the letter, the long westward journey that had delivered her to a different life. "No," she said. "It doesn't change that I left. It doesn't change 4 years." She paused. "But it changes the shape of what I've been angry at, which is something." He looked at her. "I'm sorry," he said. Not for the first time. See, he'd said it in the coffee shop, in fragments, in the careful way people say things they've been rehearsing for years and find that the rehearsal doesn't quite survive contact with the actual moment. But this iteration was different. It was quieter. It didn't have the weight of an argument attached to it, the need to establish his case. It was just the 2 words, small and insufficient and true. "I know," she said. "It's not enough." "No," she agreed. "It isn't." She folded her hands in her lap. "But I've been carrying a version of events that wasn't entirely real for 4 years, and I need time to figure out what the real version weighs." He nodded. He didn't push. That restraint cost him something. She could see it cost him, and he paid it anyway. "Elena," he said after a moment, What do you tell her? I don't know yet. She's going to ask about me. I know that. I'm not asking for anything specific. He stopped, started again. I don't want to be a secret she finds out about later. I don't want to be the thing that got hidden. She deserves better than that. Vivian looked at him for a long time. She thought about Doris and the kitchen table in Portland years ago. She thought about what it meant to build a life versus a wall. She thought about Elena at 4 years old, with her dragon named Beatrice, and her opinions about sandwich geometry and the dark eyes that came from somewhere Vivian had never been able to explain. She deserves the truth, Vivian said. A version of it that's hers. That's age-appropriate and honest and doesn't make her responsible for managing anyone else's feelings about it. She held his gaze. You don't get to be her father because you want to be. You get to be her father if you earn it, over time, consistently, in a way that puts her needs above yours every single time they're in conflict. A pause. That's the deal. I understand the deal, he said quietly. Good. She stood up. Rest. I'm going to get my daughter from school, and I'm going to make her dinner, and I'm going to tell her that the man with the big hands had an accident and is in the hospital and is going to be okay. She picked up her jacket. She'll probably want to send Beatrice to make him feel better. That's a 4-year-old's solution to most problems. Something moved across his face, brief, unguarded. Tell her. He stopped. I'll handle it, Vivian said. That's what I do. She left him there and went to collect her daughter. The weeks that followed were not simple, because nothing that follows something like that is simple. And Vivian had long since lost patience with the idea that resolution looked like a door that closed cleanly. Real resolution was messier. It was paperwork and depositions and Marco's contact appearing at inconvenient times with questions that required careful answers. It was Carver's legal team filing motions that delayed the formal charges while doing nothing to actually prevent them. It was Bianca Rossi's cooperation agreement, which came through at the end of the second week, a document that spelled out in flat legal language the full scope of what she had done and what she had agreed to provide in exchange for consideration. Vivian read the agreement once. She put it away. She didn't read it again. Dante was in the hospital for 4 days. On the 3rd day, Elena insisted on visiting because she had decided, on the basis of limited available information, that the man with the big hands had gotten hurt being brave, a characterization that Vivian neither confirmed nor denied, and that he would feel better if he had something to look at. She brought Beatrice the dragon painting, removed from the refrigerator and rolled with care and transported in a paper towel tube, and she presented it to him in the hospital room with the solemnity of a diplomat delivering a treaty. Dante unrolled it carefully. He looked at it for a moment. "Can I keep this?" he asked. Elena considered the weight of this request. "Yes," she said finally, "but you have to put it somewhere you can see it. Not in a drawer." "Not in a drawer," he agreed. "I promise." Elena appeared satisfied. She then examined the IV line with intense scientific interest, asked 3 questions about how it worked that Vivian couldn't fully answer, and announced that when she grew up she was either going to be a doctor or a dragon. She hadn't decided, before the conversation moved on to whether the hospital Jell-O was better than the Jell-O from the store. Vivian stood at the window during this exchange and looked at the parking lot below and allowed herself, for the first time in a long time, to feel something that didn't have a name she was ready to assign to it yet. Something quiet. Something that existed in the gap between the past and whatever came next. The dissolution of what remained of Dante's former operations took another 8 months to complete. He didn't hide that from her. He sent her monthly updates through his attorney, documentation of each step, the sale of assets, the termination of arrangements, the conversations with former associates that were sometimes difficult, and sometimes dangerous, and always final. She read them all. She asked questions when she had them. He answered fully, without editing. That was new. Or rather, it was what she had always wanted and had not known how to ask for, and which had arrived not through asking, but through the accumulated wreckage of everything that had broken them open. He rented an apartment 6 blocks from hers. She had not told him to, and she had not told him not to. He had simply appeared in the neighborhood, in a building close enough to be available and far enough to be a choice she could make rather than a fact she had to accommodate. He was there when she needed him, and absent when she didn't, and he was learning, slowly, imperfectly, with the visible effort of a man rewiring instincts built over decades. How to be present without taking up all the space. Elena called him Dante for 3 months. Then she started calling him D. Then, one afternoon in February, she called him something else entirely. Not dad, not father, something of her own invention that was private and specific to her, and that Vivian heard from the kitchen and stood very still for a moment after hearing, her hands flat on the counter before she resumed what she was doing. She didn't mention it to him that evening. She didn't need to. She'd seen his face. The legal case against Carver concluded in the spring. He received 12 years on federal charges related to extortion, evidence tampering, and conspiracy. A sentence his attorneys would spend years attempting to reduce with limited success because the recording from the Mercer building was the kind of clean, comprehensive documentation that defense teams have nightmares about. Bianca's cooperation agreement held. She received a suspended sentence and 3 years of supervised conditions that effectively confined her to a jurisdiction 3,000 miles away, which was not justice in any pure sense of the word, but was sufficient to make her absence from Vivian's life a structural fact rather than a hope. Vivian thought about Bianca occasionally, not often. When she did, she tried to think about her honestly. Not as a villain, because the honest version was more complicated than that. A woman who had made calculated choices, who had used people as instruments, who had been in turn used as an instrument herself, and who had at the end of it all sat in a room and told the truth about what she'd done in a voice that, Marco told her afterward, had not wavered once. She didn't know what to do with that. She set it down and left it. Some things you don't resolve. You just carry them differently over time. The rooftop was Dante's suggestion, and she almost said no, because the symbolism was almost too neat, and she'd grown suspicious of neatness after years of living inside the complicated truth of things. But it was their rooftop, the building where they'd met, at a charity event she'd attended reluctantly and left changed. And it had a view she hadn't seen in 5 years, and Elena had been asking for weeks why they kept talking about this place without taking her there. They went on a Thursday evening in June. The city below was doing what cities do in early summer, yes, living loudly, without apology, the streets moving with the particular energy of people who have survived winter and are spending that survival freely. The light was the long, golden, reluctant light of a northern evening that doesn't want to give way to dark. Elena ran immediately to the railing and looked over with the fearless curiosity of a child who has not yet learned to negotiate with heights, and Vivian's hand went to her shoulder automatically, and Elena leaned into the touch without looking away from the city below, and said, "It's so big," with the particular wonder of someone encountering scale for the first time and finding it wonderful rather than frightening. "Yes," Vivian said. "Have you been here before?" "Yes." "With D?" A pause. She looked at Dante, who was standing a few feet away, looking at Elena with an expression she'd stopped trying to decode, because it was always the same and she'd learned to simply let it be what it was. "Yes," she said, "a long time ago." Elena absorbed this. Was it the same? Vivian thought about that. She thought about who she had been at 29, standing on this roof, believing in things with a certainty she would have sworn was permanent. She thought about the person she was now, 34, with scar tissue in places she hadn't known could scar, and also with Elena, and also with this view, and also with the knowledge, slow-earned and hard-bought, that certainty was not the thing, that the thing was what you did after certainty was gone. "No," she said. "It's different." Better or worse? She looked at the city. She looked at her daughter's profile against the evening light, the jawline that was hers, the eyes that were Dante's, the particular determined set of the face that belonged only to Elena, assembled from components that had come through catastrophe and loss, and 4 years of stubborn daily survival to arrive at this specific child, here, now, wanting to know if things were better or worse. "Better," Vivian said. Elena accepted this and turned back to the view. Dante came to stand beside her at the railing. Not beside Elena, beside Vivian, his arm not touching hers, just near. The city spread below them, loud and indifferent and enormous. The same city that had witnessed everything they'd survived and would witness whatever came next with the same magnificent lack of concern. "I have something," he said quietly. "I know." He'd told her 2 weeks ago. He hadn't made an event of it. There'd been no staging, no preparation. He'd simply come by on a Tuesday evening to take Elena to the park, and before they left, He'd set a small box on her kitchen counter and said, without preamble, that it was there if she ever wanted to look at it, and that there was no pressure attached to it, and that he understood if it stayed in the box indefinitely. Then he'd taken Elena to the park and come back 2 hours later and the box was exactly where he'd left it, and they'd had dinner without mentioning it. She'd opened it at midnight, after Elena was asleep. She'd sat at the kitchen table with the box in front of her and opened it and looked at what was inside for a long time without touching it. A ring. Not the original. The original she'd left on his desk 5 years ago and had no idea what had become of it. This one was different. Simpler, if anything. A plain band with no stone, just metal. The inside engraved with 2 words she'd had to tilt it toward the light to read. Every day. She'd closed the box. She'd sat with it in the dark. She'd thought about what it meant to choose something not once in a ceremony with vows and witnesses and the clean confidence of a beginning, but continuously in the daily imperfect accumulation of decisions. The coffee on the counter, the wrong call answered, the apology that cost something real, the 6 blocks between apartments that said I'm here without demanding I'm forgiven, the hospital room and the bullet that had clarified something she hadn't been ready to name until she saw him pale and present and holding her hand. She'd thought about what it meant to have been wrong about the worst night of her life, to have built 4 years on the foundation of a misunderstanding engineered by someone who had needed her to leave, to have left, to have built something anyway, out of what was left, something smaller than what she'd imagined and more specifically hers, and irreplaceable in the way that things you've made alone are irreplaceable. She'd thought about Elena saying D and then something else. That private word that lived in the space between the daughter and the father. They were all still learning how to be to each other. She hadn't given him an answer. She'd put the box in her nightstand drawer and gone to sleep, and woken up and made Elena's lunch and sent her to school and gone to work and come home. And the box had stayed in the drawer, and he had said nothing about it because he had learned, through the long school of losing her, when to wait. Now, on the rooftop, with the evening light doing what it was doing and Elena narrating the city to herself in the ongoing interior monologue she maintained about most things, Vivian reached into her jacket pocket. She'd taken the ring out of the box that morning. She'd been carrying it all day, not toward any particular decision, just carrying it the way you carry something you're learning the weight of. She didn't put it on. She held it out to him on her palm. He looked at it, then at her. "Not yet," she said. "I'm not saying yes yet. I want you to understand that." She held his gaze. "But I'm not saying no. And I'm done carrying it alone while I figure out which one it is." He looked at the ring for a long moment. Then he reached out and closed her fingers back around it. "Keep it," he said quietly. "It's yours either way." She closed her hand around the ring. The metal was warm from her pocket. Elena had turned around and was watching them with the frank evaluative attention she brought to situations she hadn't fully categorized yet. She looked at Vivian. She looked at Dante. She looked at Vivian's closed fist. "What's that?" she asked. "Something I'm thinking about," Vivian said. "For how long?" "I don't know yet." Elena considered this. "Okay," she said, with the easy acceptance of a child who has learned that some questions resolve in their own time. Then she turned back to the railing and pointed at something below. A boat on the water, lit up in the evening, moving slowly south. "Look, it has lights." They both looked. The boat moved through the water below them, small and lit and purposeful, going somewhere they couldn't see from here, carrying whatever it carried. Dante's shoulder was against hers now. She didn't move away. The ring was in her closed hand and Elena was leaning on the railing pointing at the boat, and the city was doing what it always did, which was continue, regardless, in its loud and luminous way. She had spent 5 years learning to love a man, and 1 night losing him, and 4 years becoming someone without him, and several months finding out that the night she'd lost him was built on a lie, and several more months rebuilding something from materials that included loss and scar tissue and 1 small girl and a tremendous amount of daily choice. She didn't know what she would tell Elena someday, when Elena was old enough to want the full story. She had thought about it. She had imagined different versions of that conversation, the words she might use, the parts she would include, and the parts she would simplify. She thought she would tell it honestly. She thought she would say that love is not the absence of damage, that trust is not the absence of reason for doubt, that forgiveness is not the same as forgetting and does not require it, that a family is not the thing you start with, but the thing you keep choosing to be. She thought she would say that the hardest thing is not the first choice. It is the 1,000th one, the 10,000th. The one you make in the ordinary Tuesday morning with the ordinary lunch and the ordinary light coming through an ordinary window when there is no ceremony, no witness, no vow, just the choice itself, small and daily and real. She thought she would say, "Your father came back, not because it was easy, because he decided you were worth the hard version." She thought she would say, "I let him, not because I forgot, because I decided we were worth the risk of trying again." She thought she would say, "That is what love looks like when it grows up, not the beginning, the middle, the long, ordinary, chosen middle." But that conversation was for later, for a version of Elena who was ready for it, and a version of themselves that had more distance from it. Right now there was only this: the rooftop, the evening, the lit boat on the water below, Elena pointing and narrating with the complete unselfconscious joy of a child experiencing something beautiful, and Vivian's hand closed around a ring she hadn't put on yet, and Dante's shoulder warm against hers in the long summer light. She uncurled her fingers, looked at the ring in her palm. She thought about every day. She thought yes. Not yet, but yes. She closed her hand again and looked at the boat until it passed out of sight beneath them, and the evening settled into the particular golden stillness that comes just before dark. And Elena said, "Can we come back here?" And Vivian said yes, and meant it for more than the question asked. The city went on. The light stayed as long as it could. Then, slowly, without drama, it gave way to dark, and the dark was full of lights. And the three of them stood there together in the ordinary way of people who have survived something and found, on the other side of it, that survival was only the beginning of the work, and that the work was worth doing, and that this exact moment, imperfect and unresolved and entirely real, was what they had been moving toward all along.